Hi, everybody. I think we should be live now. Just waiting for people to come in. We'll give it a few seconds. How you doing, Paul?
I am well. It's a sunny morning in the UK, which has been very rare.
Yeah.
We've had like 40 days of rain, so a brief respite. So yeah, the mood is good in London.
Yeah, it's been pretty bad. Cool. Okay, I think we will kick off. So, welcome everybody. We're really happy to have you here today. We are going to take you through Think Forward, which is our annual social trends report. And this year we are focusing on how you can use social to build brands. And we're talking about how brands need to be built at the speed of social. My name is Moby Nazir. I am the Chief Strategy Officer and Growth Officer globally at We Are Social. And I'll introduce Paul, who's going to be taking us through the report with me today.
Yep, I head up the research and insights team. With Mobby, we put this deck together.
So, a little bit about us before we get into the detail of the report. We are a global, socially led creative agency. We have offices all around the world, from North America to EMEA to APAC. And we have over 1,200 social specialists across all of those markets. So we're delivering a really global perspective to our clients at a time when social is changing very rapidly, but it's also shaping culture and it's also becoming a much bigger part of brand building in the marketing mix. Uh, Think Forward is a part of our annual thought leadership program. It's one report in amongst a number of other reports that we do. So if you're looking for wider digital, mobile, AI trends, we have our global digital report that comes out every year. If you're looking for sector specific research, we have various reports covering different industries and categories like sports and travel. And if you're looking for platform deep dives, then we have things like our YouTube report that we did last year as well. So lots of stuff going on. Obviously, reports give you a snapshot in time, and social is changing every day, every week. So we also have our interactive feed on Instagram, which is called the feed.global. Do search for it and follow us there. We are sharing everything that we are seeing across all of our markets that we think is interesting, and we use the feed to help build all of our thought leadership. So we're really giving you access to everything that we see across the network that we think is shaping how social is going. And then in terms of Think Forward, um, we tap into all of our social expertise from around the world, all of our research and insights teams. But we've also talked to marketers this year as well. So we spoke to 300 marketers globally to help validate our findings and to provide some data and stats to back up some of the trends that we're seeing as well. So we will take you through all of that as we go through. The full report is available to download. But what we're going to do today is take you through some of the trends. And then at the end, we can share the link where you can download the full content for yourselves as well. So I'll hand over to Paul to kick off with a bit of scene setting.
Thanks, Mobby. I got ahead of myself there. Yeah, and we'll be taking questions at the end as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully talking to the converted here, but you guys know social isn't just another channel. When it's done right, when it's done well, with the right planning, the right thought, the right strategy behind it, it can be a truly growth engine for clients and brands out there. The other big thing that we know is that Mobby's already alluded to is that like social is constantly changing. So whether that is moving away from the social graph to the interest graph, whether it's where most of the conversation is now happening in out of plain sight and in harder to find places like the DMs or being shared elsewhere, or whether it's just that new platforms are popping up like Substacks or Discord, these dark forests that you can see but you can't see into. We need to be aware of how social changes and the different eras that we're going through. We also know, and it wouldn't be any kind of trend report without a mention of AI. But right now, AI is having a massive impact, not just on social, but across the whole industry. And obviously, that can kind of mean that content can feel infinite. You can produce much more content than you could in previous years. But what we're finding is that when you get down to the crux of it, that kind of content can miss meaning and actual thought behind it and cultural relevance. And when we look at the stats, we know that there's a lot of people using AI, over 1 billion users of AI per month. And I know that ChatGPT was the fastest platform to actually reach 1 billion users. We know that people are still spending a lot of time on social and so are being exposed to AI-driven content. And the estimates are that 50% of, or 57% of content last year was AI generated. And we know that the platforms are also slightly worried about that, as Adam Mosseri has pointed out earlier this year. Feels like AI fakes will outnumber real posts across social soon. So here, I guess the implication is AI scaled production, but it hasn't scaled cultural relevance. We also know that trends are super easy to spot. So you can be reacting to trends in really many different ways. This is the Coldplay incident from last year. But actually, you need a much more solid content strategy. You need to have an understanding of what you should and shouldn't be responding to. And this makes us kind of take a step back and think, well, actually, the old playbooks, the playbooks that we used to produce 10, 15 years ago, won't win in today's culture. But many brands are still using that. And the reason it won't win is that, culture is moving faster than our planning cycles. Media strategies can buy reach, but don't necessarily always build relevance. And social strategy is not always connected to the bigger brand building theory and the language of brand building. And for us, when we look at our best work, when we think about what really works in the industry, we know that cultural relevance, when it's done right, can be a real multiplier for brands and for campaigns and for content. There's loads of stats out there that back this up. There's some information come out from Kantar, which said that brands with high cultural relevance can grow nearly 6 times faster over a 10-year period than brands that don't. And 56% of people who see culturally relevant content are more likely to purchase it. So when done right, cultural relevance can do a few things. It can earn attention instead of buying it. It can make you more efficient. It helps brands become more memorable and move just beyond visibility and awareness. And it can turn everyday presence into long-term brand value. So how can brands harness culture and those social trends that we've talked about to grow?
Yeah, so what we wanted to do was put together a framework that helps us to identify the right trends that brands should be engaging with. As Paul was saying earlier, there are a lot of trends out there and there's a lot of trend jacking going on. And, not all of it is necessarily, actually going to help your brand grow. So how do you do that? Well, what we want to do is start with the fundamental drivers of brand building. So they exist, they are consistent across all channels, they are universal truths. But what we wanted to then do is actually build on top of that how social is shaping each of those forces of brand building. Because social is a very unique channel and it's disrupting each of those brand building forces in very particular ways. And it's also a superpower in very interesting ways at each stage of the brand building journey. So we started with what we're calling the cultural power loop. This is our framework for how you build brands at the speed of social. As I said, based on the fundamental drivers of brand building, which are consistent across all channels. All brands need to build their presence, they need to build their mental availability. All brands need to create trust and credibility around their products and to create proof that those products work. All brands are building cultural power. They're trying to defend their price premium. They're trying to be more differentiated and more desirable in the market. And then finally, brands can tap into advocacy and their own customers to drive participation in culture. So this is a loop. This is a fundamental brand building loop. But how is social disrupting each stage of the journey? Well, I think social is very powerful at each stage of this journey. So when it comes to presence and building your mental availability, social is there to provide that everyday relevance. So moving away from being interruptive, which is what other channels do, to actually being relevant in conversations and being able to be part of those everyday conversations. So you are top of mind when people are thinking about what brand to engage with in the category. When it comes to proof, obviously creators and influencers have had a massive impact on how proof is built in culture. So we're moving from institutional and brand-led proof to individual-led proof. When it comes to power, we're seeing a move away from being very monolithic and institutional driven to being much more democratic. Again, very much driven by creators, but also driven by UGC content in social media. And then finally, participation. So this is moving from a broadcast-led approach to a more community-led approach, which really taps into that advocacy and retention. And the power of the loop is that brands can play in any stage of this, but obviously if you play in all stages, it all compounds together. So presence will build your proof, proof will build your power, power will help you drive participation, and obviously the more people are participating in your brand, the more presence that you can build over time. So that is a framework that we have developed. And then attached to that are key trends which we think are really important and emerging at each stage of the power loop. So from presence, proof, power, and participation, what are the trends that we think are really important that brands can tap into? And then depending on where you play on that power loop, which trends you need to sort of prioritize in your brand planning. So what we're going to do now is take you through one of the trends at each stage of the power loop. And we will start off by looking at presence.
Cool. I'll take you through presence. So presence is the question we asked ourselves in presence is like, how do brands show up intuitively in everyday moments and spaces? And this is obviously something that social can have a huge impact on. You can show up across any platform at any time of day, targeting any individual at the right occasion. So it gives you a lot of different formats to really reach individuals how they want to be reached. And for us, when we looked at this, one of the big trends that came out is something that we're calling the intimacy economy. Like when the world feels big and bold and brash, especially in the feeds, but also in other areas outside of social, what we're seeing is that people are moving away from open spaces to more smaller, intimate spaces, those spaces where they can speak their mind more freely and maybe move away from public view. So we're seeing this shift from a performative approach on social to letting people into more grounded, intimate, everyday moments. We've got a really lovely example here, and this is Subway Takes, and it's from the US. And basically, it's an influencer who sits down on the subway and asks individuals, sometimes just your average Joes, or here the mayor of New York, just what their hot take is. It's a small micro moment where it can actually shed a lot of light on what someone's thinking, and also a lot of light on maybe a bigger topic. The other thing that we saw was that the Cambridge Dictionary had parasocial of the words of the year. Parasocial is that relationship that influencers have with their consumers, their followers, which makes them feel almost like an intimate relationship, almost like a mate, a friend, which is not necessarily true. So how is this showing up in culture on social? So when we looked throughout the year last year, we saw some really interesting kind of drivers of this trend. We saw that intimate stories are turning into viral dramas. And this is another account that I love. It's called The Ick. And basically what The Ick does is it finds those icks in dating, which makes you not want to be with that individual. So it's when you're on a date and someone says something, and it could be something very small. And what it does is then it turns those icks, when people submit them into the channel, into little dramas. So it turns those little things which are kind of universal to everyone. Everyone's been on a date. Everyone has icks beyond dating, but you all know what that is when you see it. And it turns it into entertainment, not in a horrible way, but in just a kind of fun, almost playful way. So it's a really interesting account that I follow because I recognize a lot of those different icks, even though I've not experienced them myself. The other thing that we saw is that shared catharsis is becoming a dominant social expression. So this is where people are coming together to actually, there's a lot of different screen clubs that are happening across the world, and people organize themselves on social, but then meet in real life and then have this cathartic experience where everyone shows their vulnerability and screams very loudly. They blew up in mid-year. I know they're happening in the US. I know they're happening in Europe. I know across the rest of the world. But screen clubs are really interesting because it follows another trend that we're seeing where people are organizing on social, they're meeting in real life to have that real connection, and then posting that content again on social. And that's a kind of trend that many brands can play into when it comes to working with creators and influencers. And finally, we're seeing that platforms which facilitate honesty and intimacy are growing in appeal. And I've already mentioned Substack, but Charlie XCX, the cultural phenomenon from Brat last year, has actually launched her own Substack. And Charlie XCX is a huge superstar. She could have that. Maintain that relationship where she has kind of a distance between her own fans. Now she's reached cult status. But what she's done is she's opened up her kind of inner thoughts and almost journals and what it's like to be a pop star on a day to day. It's a really smart move for her. It makes you feel very close, and there's a certain proximity in terms of the way she tells her stories, her tone of voice. But it gives that fans a different connection to her than just seeing her as this huge superstar. So how can brands use this? So there's a few things that brands can do. The first one is try and frame storytelling around the ordinary. So like think about how you might create that intimacy in content with audiences that brings your brands closer to everyday lives. The example we've got here is from Amazon. And basically Amazon Prime worked with different influencers and allowed them to recreate their perfect room in their house. So here, this lady is recreating her bedroom to look like the Garden of Eden. I'm not sure it's actually, that's not my idea of the Garden of Eden, but fair play. And basically, what I like about this is that you're inviting someone into your home, which is a very intimate space, but seeing how the brand can play a role in helping you create the perfect place for you. The second thing that you can think about is turning those micro moments into opportunities of joy. So think about routines and consumption behaviors and turn them into participatory trends and rituals that are using humor and creator first formats. So the obvious thing here is, get ready with me's. We see it all the time with beauty products. We've seen this extend out into really strange places. We were doing some research where people were having get ready with me going to the dentist and showcasing people actually having their teeth cleaned and polished. It's quite an unusual space, but it gained a lot of traction there and people were really leaning into that. And the third thing is think about those human truths. So especially if you're a brand with low cultural relevance, you need to manufacture that somehow. So you can either borrow that from a different cultural space, or you can think about your category and understand what the myths and taboos are and try and tackle those to really drive relatability. If you can address those unspoken truths around everyday behaviors, you can really then start creating more of an emotional connection with your consumer.
Great, thanks, Paul. So yeah, lots of examples of how brands can build presence and the way that social can really help do that. Moving on to the next part of the cultural power loop, which is proof, and how trust and expertise are really changing through social, how it's being earned now, and how it's evolving. So the trend we want to share with you in this space is called radical subjectivity. This is a very interesting trend that really leans into the context of how trust has been declining over the last few years in the world at large. It's now at an all-time low of 28% in the US. We've even got the Pope coming out and talking about misinformation and clickbait. We must be in a terrible situation if the Pope is also talking about the declining trust in the world at the moment. And obviously, we're all seeing the growing fears of AI and really whether or not the content that we're seeing is truthful or not and verified or not. So in this space, what we're seeing is radical subjectivity being foregrounded and the human perspective being increasingly valued. So the way that we've seen that manifesting over the year is, first of all, creators foregrounding their own perspectives, experiences, and interactions in the content that they produce. A great example of this is Nicholas Nuvan, who is a street blogger and creator in New York. He has evolved the Man on the Street interview to go deeper into what his subjects are really all about through the organic interactions that he has with them. So, he will think about and start to share revealing anecdotes like the fruit vendor who sells all types of exotic fruit, but also, despite being separated from his wife, speaks to her every day. So, not only is he being offered free food to review every day, but he's far more interested in the learnings and wisdoms that he can share from his interviewees. The next thing that we've seen over the last year is people are choosing more manual discovery over algorithmic convenience, again, leaning into this radical subjectivity. So we've seen things like the music streaming platform Bandcamp launching Bandcamp clubs, which is a rejection of letting algorithms define taste. So unlike having a algorithmically defined playlist to listen to, we're now looking at playlists curated by human tastemakers. So a great example of how people are moving on from subjectivity in a more radical sense. And then finally, we're seeing alternative philosophies that are driving more personal interpretations of trust and expertise. So people are forming their own personal worlds that have their own codes of trust. At one end of this spectrum, we've seen witches, tarot cards, manifestations. At the other end of the extreme, we've seen biohackers like Andrew Huberman. And 2025 was described as the year of the Etsy witch by NBC. So these are all examples of people leaning into these quite extreme alternative philosophies as a way of navigating trust and expertise in a world where trust is increasingly hard to come by. So radical subjectivity can sound quite scary to brands. What are the lessons that brands can learn from this, and how can you lean in? I think, first of all, try to think about treating subjectivity as a strength rather than a weakness. A great example of this is Vaseline Verified. They really leaned into the fact that there's no one way to use Vaseline, and there are lots of creators creating hacks about how you could use Vaseline. Some of them were dangerous, some of them were actually quite clever. And instead of Vaseline trying to just ignore that this was all going on, they leaned into it and they scientifically proved which hacks actually were working, and then they verified them. So I think a great example of leaning into that subjectivity is a strength. The other opportunity is to create space for deeper, more participatory conversations with your community. I think Sonus is a really good example of that. They have fostered a lot, a huge amount of transparency around their brand by participating in their own Reddit community with a dedicated moderator, Keith. He's really funny. He uses in-jokes and memes, but at the same time, he's troubleshooting and humanizing the brand and building trust. So lots of great ways that brands can lean into radical subjectivity.
Thanks. Right, I'll move on to power. So power is all about aspirational brands. And what does it mean now? And how can brands communicate status and prestige on social, which is obviously and hopefully more democratic? What we're going to look at here is deconstructing luxury and how new codes of luxury are coming out from the communities, from influencers, and from the grassroots. So deconstructing luxury, I think with a bit of context, we've had years now of like this eat the rich narrative that has showed up on social, but also in the mainstream media. If you think of White Lotus and Succession, they're very much all about poking fun at people who live a life of privilege. And there's this growing cynicism around wealth signaling. And what people are now looking for is something like more around discernment. So an understanding of reference points, creative lineage, and a bit of provenance and heritage around the product. And the important thing here is that creators are actually opening the gates to this, not guarding it. So often we see gatekeeping in more exclusive areas, but creators and influencers themselves are really knocking down those doors, sharing stories and processes, and also the cultural context of a more premium brand. A really good example of this is Ilias, which is basically, he's an influencer from Paris, and he wanted to go to different fashion shows. But obviously, being an influencer and not having much clout, he couldn't get into those fashion shows. So what they did is basically they set up watch parties for all the different fashion shows, and these have become almost little cultural phenomenons in themselves. And they've moved from city to city now, and hundreds of people show up, and brands are now partnering with him to really allow people closer access to exclusive spaces. So how's this showing up in culture? So I thought this was a really interesting space because this is Kylie Jenner. And Kylie Jenner, obviously, she's a very well-known celebrity, very much A-list. And often celebrities have that distance between them and their fans. But she started talking about her plastic surgery and the work that she's had done and being open and honest about it. And I think that really is a good signal when it comes to moving away from gatekeeping that to knowledge sharing. So this is very unusual for someone of her status to be doing this. And I think it's kind of set a new kind of precedent when how celebrities might interact with their fan bases. The next thing is we're seeing creators, and this is, I think she's called Snack Share. I may have got that wrong, but basically, this lady knows so much about the products that she's testing. She knows the ingredients that have gone into them. She knows the backstory. She knows where the food has been sourced. And what she's using that deep category knowledge is it's basically become an ultimate flex. So if you can talk about something in depth, if you can talk about it with a passion as well, people will want to spend time with you. And this is what we're finding with creators, especially that they're moving to more longer form types of content and deeper types of content as well. And then finally, I think this is a really great example of a creator brand here. But fans of premium brands are going deep into the archives. They're going really far back. Well, not that far back, but I remember the 80s. But this is an example called the 80s excess. And basically what they're doing is they're looking at fashion from the 80s, but looking at the different aesthetics, the different codes, the different individuals, the different catwalk and collections, and talking about them again with a lot of knowledge. And going back into history because people want to see that kind of context, that where we've come from and where we are now and the impact that it has on today's fashion. So how can brands use this? So the first thing that we've said is think about storytelling at scale, but have product within it. The example we've got here is Adidas, and this is one of our own campaigns. And Adidas came to us and they wanted to talk about the functionality of a new running shoe. But they wanted to do it with a bit of a twist and a bit of a difference. So we helped them create something called Chasing 100, which was a number of athletes who would set out to try and run 100 kilometers in less than 6 hours. No one's ever done that. It would be a world record. And we told the story in a beautiful long form piece of YouTube content, which is about 16, 17 minutes long. And we took the users and viewers on a journey of like how these individuals were going to run this marathon, not a marathon, 100 kilometers. It had to start at midnight. It was on a Formula One track in Italy, and people were running laps and laps and laps. We managed to break the record, but what was really smart about it is that we had this hero piece of content, but throughout we told the story of the product, the unboxing of the product to the athletes. We had social first content that we could then package up and put into different platforms. It was a really smart way of thinking about a big brand story, but then having that product functionality told throughout. And it really elevated it from just being quite a functional thing to something much bigger. The other thing is think about cultural relevance and not reach. So when we're working with our clients and our influencer teams are coming together, obviously we want to reach as many people as possible. But often what we're seeing is that those influencers and creators and those individuals and other social accounts that have cultural relevance and a real smart take on the world often actually work better than just those creators with massive, massive reach. So think about talent that embodies your brand values, your creative ambition, and work with their signals to reinforce that meaning that you wanna land. And then think about turning complexity into value. So think about, again, like I said, long form storytelling. We are seeing a shift to people spending more time with content, behind the scenes access, native platform native formats. Those things where you can tell the story and the provenance and the heritage of a brand, and people want to spend time with that. They want to understand that, especially if they're going to invest a lot of money into something. So think about how you can turn that complexity into a value and a bit of a flex.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to go through the last stage of the cultural power loop now. If you guys do have any questions for us, we'll be carrying on at the end. So do put them in the chat and we can take them as they come. So the last stage of the cultural power loop is participation. And this is all about how community and fandom can be harnessed to help build your brand. So we had a couple of trends on this in the report, but the one I'm going to focus on today is called reference maxing. And this is a very interesting trend, which is showing how cultural products have become the reference points that fans use to build their own narratives. We saw that this last year with things like the Jet 2 jingle being used in a sort of chaotic way. It's a very sort of upbeat, happy brand jingle, but people started to use it as a medium to share some of their holiday mishaps. So a great example of that reference maxing going on. The marketers that we spoke to with the survey that we did, 73% of them believe that fandoms is going to be critical to their social strategy and to brand building this year. So it's definitely an area that brands are looking to lean into more. And we're also seeing things like the actual fans of the institutions and brands that we're all using becoming more popular and actually being talked about more than some of the athletes themselves. So, for example, Manchester United's most talked about star last year wasn't a player, but actually a fan who's been refusing to cut his hair until the team won 5 games in a row. So lots of great examples of how reference maxing is happening in social at the moment. The things that we've been seeing over the last 12 months that really build up this trend. First of all, we're seeing celebrities and influencers who are actually feeding fans storylines to fuel the discourse. So if you're an actor or an actress and you're in a film, obviously people will talk about you when you're on the TV or you have some content going out. But how do you fuel that discourse ongoing? Well, a great example of this was Kiki Palmer and the story that she created with Sean Evans, the presenter of the Hot Ones show. So, in a 2025 episode of the Hot Ones, Kiki Palmer actually surprised Sean Evans with a playful kiss after learning that he once publicly admitted to having a long time crush on her. So this is something she really played into, and by actually going in for that smooch and to see if there was a spark, the fans absolutely loved it, and Evans happily obliged. That moment became quickly one of the show's most talked about viral clips, delighting fans and sparking viral reactions online. So a great way of showing how celebrities and influencers are feeding these storylines and fueling the discourse. The next thing that we're seeing in this reference maxing space is ecosystems that are being built around fan discourse. So platforms that allow fans to analyze, expand, recode the worlds that they love, treating that discourse as a world building opportunity. So we've seen platforms like Lore Obsessed, a search engine that's dedicated to fandoms that raised $1.1 million in funding last year. We've also seen a platform called Stranger Lore, which is the first ever 100% fan source library for theories related to Stranger Things being developed. So spaces where fans can really go to town on their obsessions. And then finally, we're seeing fans are not just responding to culture, but they're actually directing it. And celebrities and brands are really leaning into this. So the example we have here is Lorde, who incorporated a TikToker skit into her live show. Lorde noticed that this particular TikToker was in the audience and she jumped down off the stage and created that skit as a segment in her live performance. And obviously that went absolutely crazy on social media. So now fans are sort of shaping the culture, not just responding and reflecting it. So what are the lessons that brands can learn from this? Well, first of all, think about referencing the unexpected. We are seeing cross fandom mashups consistently driving impact, and the more unexpected, the better. A great one from last year was the Lego F1 partnership. Both brands are able to tap into each other's adjacent audiences, extend their fandoms, extend their reach, and extend the conversation that goes around their brands by bringing those two entities together. The second opportunity is to really let your fans lead, and think about how you can harness and mobilize fandoms, not just for communication purposes, but also for product development purposes. So a great example we have here is that McDonald's Heist, which was McDonald's bringing in recipes from other markets that are really popular that fans love into markets that they don't exist. So, for example, you could get the Korea McDonald's menu in the UK. So this is something that fans have been asking for a very long time. McDonald's really leaned into it. They created those menus, and it was a short term that they were available, but that created a huge amount of momentum around the brand. Obviously, a lot of operational work behind the scenes to bring those menus into the real world and to bring them onto into different markets. But a great example of a brand leaning into what fans want and allowing them to lead what they're doing from a marketing and product perspective. And the final area in this space is give fans the tools of the trade. Really think about how you can give fans the cultural material around your brand to, for them to interpret and remix. Again, this is a space that can feel quite scary for brands. It's letting go of your brand IP to a certain extent. But we're starting to see that this is becoming the norm more and more. A great example of that is Disney that is partnering with OpenAI to be the first major content licensing partner on Sora, for example. So they will be, providing little short video clips from their IP, from Marvel, from all of the universes that consumers can then use to remix and engage in culture in their own terms. So that takes us through Think Forward for our presentation for this year. Hope that that has been interesting to you guys. You can download the full report at our website. And if there are any questions, please let us know. I can't see any at the moment. Let me just check. A couple of people asking about access to the deck. Yes, we can definitely share that after today. Um, any other questions?
So when someone's just asked if you had to pick one part of the cultural power loop for a small local brand to prioritize, what would it be and why? So I think this is a very researcher response to that, but I guess it depends on the type of brand you are. But I think the one thing that social does so well and probably has an outsized impact in terms of the power loop is your ability to be present in people's lives. And more often than, like TVCs or billboards or out of home, but also the ability to create a community and to think about the kind of participatory element. So I think that's where social has really revolutionized the part of brand building there, having regular access to your consumers, finding those best consumers that you that really love your brand and making them your advocates and quite a vocal part of that. Like I said, one of the things that Mobby was describing in the last trend is like the power of fandoms. Fandoms, if you really want to work together with brands and if you harness them in the right way and mobilize them and set them on an objective, they often go away and achieve it. And they can do it much better, much more authentically than actually a brand telling you to do something. So from my point of view, that's where smaller brands might be able to play a bigger role. But like the example of Vaseline Verified that Mobby went through was really working throughout the whole loop. It started with a product truth. It was starting in that area of like proof, but the way that it executed was a really creative and powerful way of thinking about how you might move your brand and into a different space and encouraging participation, which then led into more presence. Mobby, I don't know if you've got a different perspective on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you just said. And I think it ties into another question that's come up, which is how can more functional brands and categories engage across the loop? Because I think one is the size of your brand. Are you small? Are you local? Are you global or not? But another is what category are you in? And I definitely think that, if you are a more functional brand and there's less natural conversation around your brand, you are going to need to focus more on the upfront parts of presence, particularly presence, really, and proof. And that is what we see with our clients as well, that are more in the functional space. Um, I think the question was, how do you leverage the participation space of the loop if you are a more functional brand? And I think a really good example of that is, one of our clients, Visa, who have a partnership with F1. And I think that partnership like lends the fandom element to their brand. And we've created some great social content off the back of that partnership. And it gets people talking about Visa in the context of F1. So I think you can sometimes borrow relevance to different parts of the cultural power loop that you don't have a natural relevance in. But as Paul was saying, the more parts that you can play in, the greater overall effect that you will have.
Yeah. And I think like where you can merge two different fandoms, that's really smart as well. But yeah, like Mobby said, if you're a functional brand and you want to play in fandoms, you can either manufacture something for people to talk about or borrow it through sponsorships, through different ways of working with different fandoms and playing in that space. So the question was also around finance. So I would also say finance is actually a really interesting spot. If you look at social and look at the conversations around finance, there's a lot of conversations there. There's people wanting to like retire early. There's people wanting to maximize their income and have passive income. There's a lot of conversation that goes on social that is around finance. And while it is very functional, there's obviously there's a big emotional benefit for being financially secure. So you might be able to think about what conversations are happening there and then really lean into that.
Yeah, it's probably worth noting, we didn't share it today, but within the report, we have also shown how we've used the Cultural Power Loop for some of our clients. And we've got clients across a sort of variety of sectors. So worthwhile just digging into that in a little bit more detail to see it in action.
Yeah. Um, there's a question here around radical subjectivity and people choosing manual discovery over algorithmic ease. How can you see this evolving, especially with regard to the prevalence of AI?
Hmm.
Um, it was my birthday a couple of weeks ago. I'm getting served so much content around like alternative perspectives, like astronomy and just like really random stuff. I think it's because my birthday's just been. But I think with AI in particular, yes, you see that will be like an alternative authority there. You need to remember that AI is obviously built, the LLMs that power that are built on things like Reddit, are built on things like review sites, but people are turning to AI to answer questions around, difficult relationships, therapy. I wouldn't recommend that, and I don't think anyone would. But I think for a brand, if you're looking to show up higher on the AI algorithms, one of the things that our clients are asking us more of is like how to have a proper Reddit strategy so that you will appear higher in there. Um, so I think how brands are going to use AI, like especially within the big wider marketing mix, there's certain ways that you can speed up and shortcut some of the production values around content. But I think if you really want to harness the power of AI as a brand, you should think about how you can show up more frequently and higher up in their return results, and that will probably be through a Reddit strategy.
Yeah, I also think because obviously the question referenced manual discovery
Mm.
over kind of algorithmic or AI convenience. And I think the manual discovery part of it is it's all about the human, the being very clear that a human was involved in this. And I think that's going to also probably apply to content that we see. So I don't think consumers have an issue with AI generated content so long as it's good content, but there will be a premium placed on obviously human created content as well. And I think there's going to be, there's going to be content that's clearly AI generated, and there's content that's had human involvement in it, high craft, great sort of expertise involved, a radical view that, isn't just the amalgamation of everybody else's views. So I think there are spaces for brands to lean into that will feel fresh and will be an alternative to the quick, convenient, distilled, um, I suppose, sort of averaged out view that you might get from algorithms.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that radical subjectivity is really important because people are kind of looking and it feels really fresh at the moment.
Yeah. This is a big question, Mobby. The next one is like, what would you say is the biggest challenge against social media in marketing at the moment for brands to be aware of in parallel?
Yeah.
Um, that is a big question. For me, and we've talked about this before, and Mobby's talked about this in other spaces, but I think the shift from the social graph to the interest graph has really changed the way that social interacts. So social was about who you follow, whether it was your family or friends or celebrities, but now it's around what you like. And so it's really shifted um, a brand from just being able to connect with individuals to being able, I guess the biggest shift is that social has now become the biggest entertainment space in the world. And when you're a brand trying to show up and be relevant, you're competing with everyone. You're competing with creators. You're competing with meme accounts. You're creating with your competitor set. You're competing with my mate. You know what I mean? Like, so you really have to have a point of view on why you're showing up and how you're showing up, and you have to be entertaining. Now, entertaining can be a lot of different things. It can be ha ha funny. It can be like it can be heartwarming. It can be drama. But you really need to be able to stand out in the feed. Because if you can't do that, you'll just be middling and a bit meh. And I think that's what a lot of brands are trying to struggle with right now. It's like how to show up and have their values and talk about their products, but in a really entertaining way that stands out from some of the more kind of extreme content that might be coming out from creators, influencers, and other accounts.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also there's just the sheer operational challenge of the volume of content that's
Yeah.
needed now, right? So multiple channels, fragmentation of attention, needing to be constantly in people's feeds to be noticed. I think the sheer volume of content that's required now for brands is a challenge. But I think that's why we're now increasingly obviously leaning into creators, to help generate some of that content and to do it in a genuinely social native way. So as Paul was saying, we need more content, but it's got to be more socially native. It's got to be genuinely entertaining. And doing, having those multiple hits over time versus one or two big hits it's a big challenge. Like you need a machine and an engine to keep that going. You need cultural insights. If you're a global brand, it gets even harder because you've got to do it across multiple markets. And then you have governance challenges across all of that. So I think as social media has just scaled and got bigger, the operational challenges around it have just got bigger and bigger as well. And I think that's another challenge for brands in kind of consistently getting it right. Because unless you're consistently getting it right, you're not building your brand. And if you're doing random things all over the place, they might be one-off hits, but they're not building up to and a bigger set of perceptions around your brand, which is what you want to create.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the questions. There's one of the questions was who was the fashion influencer on the watch party? It's Ilya and it's il.ya. If you download the report, there'll be references to that individual in there. Um, someone's asking, so talking about creators and influencers and the outcomes. Someone's asked, how are we determining the fit for the right creator and the brand? I'll talk you through how we do it at We Are Social. So there's a few different things that we look at. So first, we have does the influencer have the scale that we need, and do they have the audience that we want to target? So that is, do they have the right number of individuals if it's in a certain market? So is like 50, 80% of their follower base in the UK, for example. Do they have the right engagement rates? Do they have the right and the right reach? The other thing that we do is that when we're selecting influencers, we carry out something called social search. So we want to know what people are searching for around a specific brand, a different product, and we want to see if the creator is also talking about that. So we overlay that layer. The other thing that we want to do is then we've got that's kind of the hard data. So like that's what we're doing. They're known for talking about this subject. They have a lot of authority around it. The second thing that we look at is their creative. So are they doing anything really interesting creatively? Will that fit our aesthetic as a brand? Are they pushing the elements of culture as well? So like, are they doing something different and unusual and that we can harness and really help create content off the back of with them? And that's the second part. And then the third part is then we look at them as from a partnership point of view. Do we see this as being someone we can work with for a long term? Because with creators and influencers, you can use them for that one spike, but where we see the benefit is if you have them consistently on roster working for you as a brand advocate. And if they have the data to back up, this is who they are, they're going to reach the right people at the right amount, and we're going to get engagement, and they're already talking about the topics that we want to talk about. Two, are they doing something really interesting creatively? And three, is there a good chance that there'll be a long-term brand partnership with them? Then they're the kind of three different elements that we bring together when we're selecting influencers for our clients. Moby, I'm not sure you'll probably have anything more to say about that, unless you've got a different.
No, I was just going to say it probably lends itself to another question that we've had, which is around the tension between creators that have a strong stance and sort of certain values and brands sometimes not wanting to embrace those types of creators. And I think the question is, um, will brands be forced to embrace a stance rather than trying to remain neutral on topics that mean a lot to consumers? So I think that's an interesting question because obviously creators increasingly do have strong points of view and are not afraid of sharing those because I think increasingly that there will be brands that will work with them. So I think in the past, maybe creators would keep some of their points of view to themselves, for commercial purposes, but now there are more brands that will be willing to partner with them on those stances. Do I think that brands will be forced to embrace a stance? I think that's very dangerous. I think, if you're going to take if you're going to have a very clear point of view on something, it needs to be baked into your brand DNA. It can't be something you just do for social. And those are much bigger and wider questions that, brands need to consider. But overall, do I think brands need to have a stronger point of view? Yes, I do think they do. But I don't think it's something you can embrace just for social. So yeah, hopefully that helps answer that question. And then maybe one last question we could tackle, Paul. I saw this one come in, I think is quite interesting. Um, the question is that a lot of brands, yeah, this person is working with a lot of brands where creative campaigns at the forefront, but social activations aren't at the forefront of those briefs. So where would we recommend energy is put when addressing the deliverables for social cultural referencing at the time? So yeah, this is a really interesting question and something we deal with all the time. We describe ourselves as a social first creative agency for that very reason. We really believe that social thinking should be built in up front in your creative ideas. We find it's a real struggle if an agency or a brand has a creative campaign idea and they've really not thought about what the conversations on social are around it, how culture is being shaped around that topic. And if you're sort of handed something that hasn't had social baked in and then you're trying to make it social later, that really doesn't work. So the way we work with clients is to build those social insights upfront into bigger campaign briefs, not just briefs for social content, but wider integrated campaign briefs as well, and making sure those social insights are being shared up front and they are being used to help shape the overall idea as well. So it isn't something that we do at the end and then expect it to be successful.
Yeah.
Paul, I'm sure you got loads to add to that.
Yeah, my first thing was like, spoiler alert, people don't wake up wanting to see ads. You know what I mean? People like people don't go, oh, I can't wait to see this ad today. But like Mobby was saying, one of the things that we have as one of our mantras internally at We Are Social is all our ideas, our creative mission is and vision is ideas worth talking about. So that could be on social, but it could also be in the real world. Why would I care? Why would I want to share this? Especially as we said earlier on, like if social's impacting in darker places and DMs on dark social, you need to have that kind of value exchange where you're creating enough value that people want to take it to their mates, want to take it to their family. And so that's something that we start to think about. And that's I don't think that's just necessarily just a social domain. That's where I think most of the kind of any kind of creative idea should be grounded in terms of what is that water cooler moment? What do you want people to talk about? What do you want people to share? And if you start with that as your kind of overarching objective, as one of the one of the objectives, obviously you need to have your brand objectives and marketing objectives in there, but like why would someone care? Why would someone go and talk to their family, their friends, their mates about it and share it on social? That should be part of any objective up front when it comes to a creative brief. And yeah, I think that's where you would start.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then like how that then manifests on across different platforms, different channels, that is a bigger conversation.
Yeah, I think that's it's probably a great place to wrap it up. Thank you so much for all of your questions. Thank you for joining us today. Do go onto our website and download the report. Do follow us on Instagram at the feed. If you've got any questions for Paul or myself, you can definitely find us online. Just contact us. We'd be really happy to follow up on any of what we've shared today. But that's it from us. Thanks a lot. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye
Bye.
bye.